Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I'd like to tell you about the newest version of Righteous, Righteous 3. Righteous is for taking final mixes, essentially, and being the last thing that you put on the mix. It was originally done for the purpose of, here, let me scooch over here. It was originally done for this little device. This is a Pono player. As you can see, ta-da. And the whole purpose of Righteous was to let you do mixes to this player in such a way that it kind of compelled you to hit a loudness target that wasn't the same thing people do for CDs and things. This is it started out as an anti-loudness war plugin. Now, what happened after that was very interesting. Nothing about the Pono makes you not use, limiting and clipping and the whole loudness war stuff. The idea for Righteous 1 was simply to compel you to not be able to do that. It has a particular way of behaving where it'll saturate without taking all of the peak energy away. It saturates by driving a kind of low-end warmth and a tone quality thing. And I can show that to you now. Now this is just a bit of a recording. The main reason I chose it is it's got a lot of stuff going on in it, and it's got a lot of low bass. Now listen to what happens when I turn this on. It does some interesting things to the lows and pretty much just the entire range of the sound. The idea here was to make the output, again, for this device, for a Pono player, or indeed any high-res player, where you would not be pushing level to get a set output. You would just be keeping it so that you wouldn't really be distorting. In fact, the first Righteous did not have any form of distortion to it. And then I discovered a thing called YouTube volume maximization, and everything changed. YouTube started doing a thing where they started maximizing the volume of some things handed to them and turning down other things handed to them. And that made the entire world of loudness maximization completely change. People want to use loudness maximization because if you have something that's like a half a dB louder than something else, people will tend to assume that the thing that's half a dB louder is better in the absence of anything else going on. I mean, there's plenty of audio manufacturers and plug-in manufacturers who do this on purpose, and it's good to be aware of that. But that has driven the loudness war for years, and that is why CDs and things have become kind of unbearable sounding. YouTube does a particular thing, and I can show it to you using this plugin that I always endorse and support, Voxengo Span. I swear by this thing. Voxengo Span has a RMS setting here, statistics, which is the overall RMS level. And if you play something through it, like this is just the raw file again, you'll see that it converges to a output level. Looks to be around 18 to 19 dB here. YouTube will take that in and be completely fine with it. But if you do something like, for instance, let's be really obnoxious. This is going to sound terrible, but I'm going to only leave it on for a moment. Okay, hold your ears. We're going to turn this on again. There's nothing happening to this other than it's going to be clipping the outputs. And we're going to watch what it does to the RMS level there. or when we unbypass it, then we'll see what happens. Okay, hold your ears. Now that was almost like 5 dB, and the RMS is drifting right back down again. But that's the kind of levels that modern CDs and productions have been reaching. This is not a good thing. That is bad sounding. But there's another thing going on there. The YouTube is a common output format that people try to mix for. iTunes is another. iTunes has a separate thing going on there. And YouTube started putting in a kind of replay gain thing going on, where if you were higher than minus 13 dB of, dang, I can't actually remember at the moment. It's not RMS, but it's closely related to it. There is a new form of metering that it's like some type of volume units, and it's very effective. It's very good. The ballistics of it are calculated well, but it equates to be pretty similar to RMS in practice. And YouTube is turning people's videos down if they go over 13 dB. Now you'll notice that the initial thing for Righteous was not going over 13 dB, but you can also see that I've got this thing called loudness target. Loudness target is currently set to 13 dB. Now let's see what happens when we first turn it on and hear what it sounds like, and then start adjusting the gain. Turned on. You can see that this is a kind of rounder sound, but we're not reaching that level. So what we'll do is we'll start adding some gain. And you can hear that it's starting to fill up in the lows. The lows are starting to affect the overload setting. We can exaggerate this, and you can hear what it does when you push it too far. I'll do that now. You can easily hear that distorting the lows, but you can also see that that pushed it right up to 12 dB or so. The idea of Righteous3 is that you can hear plainly when it is going to a loudness target that is too high, and all the while, whether your stuff is coming at 13 dB, whether it's coming at minus 16 dB, whatever, the peaks are still going to full scale. They're actually hitting a simplified version of 80 clip. 80 clip is the clipper that I developed for the previous form of things, the CD market and loudnating in the traditional sense. But this is a simpler version that doesn't do any of the things that let 80 clip really push the levels cleanly, because there's no more reason to do that. In order to target YouTube, what you do is you hit that exact level and don't go beyond it, and that way YouTube will not turn down your peaks. We'll go back into that again, and I think my 10 dB here was way too hot, so I'm going to pull it right back down again. And then start sneaking it up. Now I'll note that some of the tones in here, like that bass, that's the sound of the bass. It does have a degree of saturation into it already. But here we've got around 15 dB. We can push it a little bit more. Now we can hear the lows really breaking up there, so I'll pull it back somewhat. And there's another thing that's going on. I have a setting called asymmetrical bloom. Now, the original Righteous had the equivalent of this setting cranked all the way up at all times. But what it produces is the tone algorithm of it is filling out second harmonics in such a way that it spikes out too much on the negative side. Asymmetrical bloom gives you a fade between that and an algorithm that was what was in Righteous3. Righteous3 had a symmetrical bloom at 0 and worked in a way to manage that, which cleaned up some of the tone. It made it a little less sloppy. It made it behave a little better when you pushed it hard. So what you'll hear now is going from asymmetrical bloom all the way up, and I'll dial it back to 0, and you'll hear the bass clean up a little bit. This is full crank. And that's more well behaved. Now you might very well want to sneak in some of that anyhow. Fill it out a little bit, but maybe not all the way. Because people liked having this there. It's just that it's perhaps too strong of an effect. You don't necessarily want it all the time. And this is giving, I can probably even turn it up a tiny bit. And as such, we're getting an RMS level. And this is one of the softer periods of this particular little bit of music. This RMS level, the loudness level here is peaking out strongly, but it's not going to be turned down by YouTube. I've already tested this. So this is a way to get full-scale dynamic peaks in energy through YouTube content while gauging the level of loudness that you're putting through in such a way that you can hear the density of it clearly. Because you can't always hear exactly 13 dB relative to, say, exactly 12 dB or exactly 14 dB. That's, you know, dense enough that you're doing a certain amount of clipping or peak limiting, but not enough that it's going to become really obvious. Like when you start getting up to something atrocious like 6 dB, it becomes very obvious because you're blatantly distorting. But minus 13 is not that big of a deal. And there's something else as well. YouTube is not the only possible format. iTunes likes to do its replay gain at minus 16 dB. So we can just target that. I can do that several ways. I could also hold the slider, hold down Option for fine adjustments, as it just told us on the screen. Or I can just type it in. One of the things with this particular form of making the plugins is they don't break when you do a small change in the graphical format. That's pretty stable. And I can type in whatever settings I want. And it saves it with this stuff where you can, you know, save a setting and it gets saved in Logic and so on. But with our minus 16 level, we still want a certain amount of boost in here to reach that, but not as much as it was using. So what we can do is guess at about, see, I'm already hearing it saturate. I can show you that. This is also a fairly sparse little bit, but about 4 dB, we're starting to creep up over 20. We're starting to hear it saturate, and you can see it creeping up to the minus 16 point. I can show you what it sounds like when you just set the loudness target down. It'll scale everything down so that the particular tonality of the processing exaggerates itself. And that sounds kind of like this. Here's how to really hear what it's doing in the worst possible way. Now you never ever push it as hard as this. But this is what it would sound like to slam Righteous. Never slam Righteous. Or you can take it the opposite extreme. That's clean as anything. It's clean as anything because the target we're aiming for is minus 4 dB. You'd have to push stuff that loud in order to hear what that sounds like. And you can pretty much pick whatever you like. I'll go back to the 13. And as you can hear, this is still pretty clean because we're not pushing it to the point where we're starting to hear it pack up. But I can do that. The stuff will sort of bloom and come through, but also kind of pack up, and you'll hear it start to saturate and fill up. I can pull back the asymmetrical bloom a little bit to make that sound nicer. And that's how we use it. That's how we use it. Now, the one remaining thing that I have yet to show you about this is this output bit depth. Neither Righteous3 or Righteous2 had this. And that's because the original Righteous was designed for this device. The whole idea was that it would compel you to do all of your work in 24-bit audio without a lot of distorting everything for level, and do everything that would make it sound nice for Pono so that Neil Young doesn't have to be sad. That's a wonderful, beautiful goal, but there's other goals to be had. With this very piece of, I guess I could call it music, well, it's what I do, I had a reason to make the sort of Pono-friendly 24-bit, that's the raw capture. I still have it. That's perfectly fine. But I decided what I wanted to do was upload the audio to YouTube through Righteous so that I had it dialed in to exactly the right level, but also as 16-bit. Because what I do is I save the raw audio file as a AIFF or WAV file. And then when I make a video out of that stuff, I just include the raw uncompressed file. And the reason I do this is because you shouldn't be sending music to YouTube as a compressed format. You shouldn't be giving them MP3 or MP4 if you can get away with it. YouTube will handle all kinds of strange video uploads and so on, and you can give them uncompressed audio. What will happen there is they will save your audio forever. If they ever get to a place where they can upload or let people stream uncompressed stuff or whatever when everybody's on fiber or something like that, then they'd be able to use that. Until that point, they'll never let anybody see your audio, but they will do all of their transcoding from it. And if you give them a audio file that is an MP3 or something like that, or an MP4 based out of your video format, they will transcode from that. They will never give people exactly what you gave them, no matter what you do. In fact, they will transcode everything to 128K MP3. Now, that's pretty sad. But it means that the process of working with this kind of stuff is getting as much as you can out of the format that is the only format they let you have. So I made a 16-bit output bit depth. Now both of these are the naturalized dither. That is in my DitherBlocks plugin, and you can buy the DitherBlocks plugin and then use all different kinds of dithers and noise shapers. But Righteous now gives you the option to go directly to what you'll need for CD format at any loudness target that you want, including ones that are louder than YouTube will allow you to have. And then you just you either export a 16-bit or you export a 24-bit and then just chop it in some other kind of program, anything like that. But you've got the naturalize noise shaper. And naturalize is kind of funny. It's neither really a dither or a noise shaper. It's essentially a Benford realness statistical redistributor, which is, that sounds like something that Marvin the Martian would have. But it does have a very natural sound. I can even let you hear the output bit depth in 16-bit relative to the uncompressed output. And that's going to be kind of interesting because this is on YouTube, but you're hearing it through 128K. But the point is, maybe you can hear a little bit of that even through that. That's what plugins are supposed to do, is do things that you can hear even through the degradation of what the music industry as it stands allows you to have. You should be able to hear this stuff on earbuds. So this is completely uncompressed. And as you can see, we are actually clipping the outputs without Righteous by 1.5 dB. So here's what, and don't let that hi-hat thing fool you. That is electro hat. I also saw that. It's currently doing a thing where it's kind of a sound effect. The real hat is what you'll hear. Now let's turn on Righteous 3, and it'll go to 16-bit. You can immediately hear the bass getting kind of more throbbing, and you can also see some interesting results in the extreme highs and stuff. But this is CD quality from pretty much full-on Logic output, and it's not a drop significantly. It's doing useful things tonally. Now I can switch it back to 24-bit. I don't think you're going to hear this directly, but if you were listening to the output of this off of Pono, maybe you would. If you can hear the change of that through... That was an interesting change. If you can hear the change of that through YouTube, making everything be 128K lossy encoding, you're a very fine listener. But that's not the only option that I have. I've also got, and there's an interesting thing, this particular part of the music, I can hear it pushing the level a little bit too hot. See, it's going above 13 dB. YouTube would be turning me down, so let's back this off. I can hear it saturating Righteous. This is exactly what Righteous is supposed to do. Let's pull it back. There, and now we're at a setting where Righteous is, YouTube is definitely not going to be turning this part down. Even though in both cases, we are overloading, we're distorting by almost 2 dB there. But if I turn Righteous on, that's now fixed. That's not going to be a problem anymore. The last setting we have is, and you saw it when I went to this control before, 32-bit, because there's no special reason that I have to tie you to the naturalize word length reducer. Righteous was designed with this reducer, and it's set up so that that's what you get by default. But people ask for all kinds of things. People are asking for ways to put a limiter in after Righteous. I don't approve of that, but as long as I was adding the setting to do 16 or 24-bit CD or, say, Pono quality, there's something going on with the Purist line of plugins that I've made. These plugins use a special way of going to the core audio bus. Core audio bus is a 32-bit bus. It's 32-bit floating point. What that means is that you can have peaks that are way beyond 0 and quiet sounds that are right down as low as you could possibly imagine them to go. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's every possible sound accurately recorded in the middle of all that, because 32-bit is nothing but 24-bit with a scaling factor added to it. So when you're converting to 32-bit or calculating in 32-bit, if you're calculating two things at very different levels, you might end up throwing out a bunch of data in the one level in order to do a multiply at the other level. Digital audio is funny and weird. And I've been working on this stuff for a lot of years, and that's one of the places that I've found ways to make gains. So Purest Gain and the Purest line of plugins do their calculation at a 80-bit depth. Technically in the PPC, I think it's something along the lines of 120-bit depth, but we don't really use PPC, although I support it. But 80-bit depth is still way in excess of what we functionally use. It just makes sure that our multiplies and things are being done where none of the information is being thrown away. And then we've saved up all of the corrections and multiplications and things that you're doing. You have to go back to the 32-bit bus, and doing that, you record what you're putting into the bus and then compare it to what you had and save up the remains of the tiny little amounts that are being thrown away. So, the Purest plugins, when you do a 32-bit output, they're doing a kind of noise shaping to include these tiny amounts of information that are being thrown away when you convert over to the 32-bit floating point bus. And the neat thing about it is that is being done, it's not a dither, because you have to have fixed point for a dither. Instead, it's just saving the information. And it doesn't matter what the scaling factor is doing. It's just saving the information and re-including it. And that's what this new version of Righteous 3 does for the first time. I've had previous versions where, I caught myself trying to put that in and then went, wait, I'm dithering to 24-bit fixed point and making it be exactly that level so it no longer matters what the overflow would be. I've already dealt with that. This has a dither built into it, or something like a dither. And then I added 16-bit that's even coarser. That's designed to put out exactly what it was supposed to be. But when you do the 32-bit, now you have that Purest line of plugins noise shaping built into it. So there's 3 different ways of getting an output, and quite a few minutes of really strange music from me. Thank you very much. And my new version of Righteous 3. I'm pushing on this really hard because there is a lot of reason to get good at exporting to YouTube or iTunes. The world still works in such a way that if you can get a dB of level more than the next guy, somebody out there is going to think your thing sounds better. That doesn't mean that your music is better. That doesn't mean that your song is better. None of that matters. But as far as just sounding better or sounding bigger or sounding fuller, a dB of gain is going to make all the difference in the world. You can no longer do that with peak limiting. You can no longer do that with clipping. Righteous adds a kind of low-end fullness and a kind of texture and quality to the sound that specifically kind of gains density at exactly the loudness target you want. You tell it what you want and then push it until you feel it starting to get dense and full and saturated, and then stop right there. You can confer with the RMS levels and so on, double check on all that, but the basic upshot of it is get it to where your sound density sounds like it's getting full and solid, but is not generating distortion for you. And if you want to be really cautious about that, crank asymmetrical bloom way up. If you're not so worried about it, then pull asymmetrical bloom back down so it'll be less obvious when it generates artifacts. But the important thing about that is those artifacts are just your signpost. Anytime you're giving those, anytime you're producing those, your peak levels are being clipped at 0, just like with the limiter or a clipper. It's just that YouTube won't turn you down from that at that point. And if you're just slamming stuff with a peak limiter or a clipper until it sounds like modern designed music and so on and so forth, they'll just turn you down. You'll have the sound density that you were shooting for, except for that you'll be having it in a sort of small, thin, boxy quality because they've just made your entire thing down like 2 dB or down 4 dB or something horrific like that. So don't go there. You don't have to give up entirely on pushing stuff for loudness. You just have to do it in a smarter way so that the bulk of the sound is somewhere you can hear and get at it, so you can interpret it, so you can hear where it's coming through. Righteous actually, because of the way that it does it, it's actually sort of gathering stuff into that zone, which is rather helpful. It's also real good at giving you bass, and bass is real nice on things like YouTube where they're giving this replay gain stuff, because at a level of -13, you got a lot of room for bass. You got a lot of room for low-end punch, and it's great to have in your mix. And Righteous will really make the most of that. But all the time that you're doing that, every other sound that you're doing has the capacity to push peak energy right up to 0, at which point it'll be clipped off by the simplified version of 80 clip, which is a kind of clipping that is lower on the sort of nasty high-frequency artifacts. It always has been. All the versions of 80 clip do this. But that's built into Righteous 3 now. And the whole combination of it is designed to let you pick whatever music you want, and EDM is great for this kind of stuff. That's why I use this as an example. You can have all the sort of punch and throb and size and energy that you want and put it across on YouTube optimally. I think this is a good tool. I think it's also a real helpful tool in a world where you're never going to get away from volume normalization again. And I'll tell you why that is. The reason for that is YouTube wants to make everybody turn on autoplay and never turn it off again. They turn on autoplay for you, and you have to manually turn it off fairly often. At some point, you're probably going to have to go to doing it in like sneaky browser settings or running plugins just to turn the autoplay off, because that's how badly they want to turn it on, and they get what they want. The reason they want that is because they will put advertisements in between tracks. So they want that to work, and anytime you have audio of which one is like 6 dB hotter than the other, that makes autoplay look bad. So pretty much the way this works is everybody in the music business has been preempted by YouTube wanting to run advertisements between videos. That's all that's left, really. You know, what we want as far as audio, whether we want loudness wars, whether we don't want loudness wars, whether we want more dynamic range than 13 dB, does not matter. We don't have an input, but we have the ability to work with what we're given. And 13 dB is not terrible. It's kind of similar to the loudness density of full-on brown noise. If you have a natural type sound, like a general ambient type sound, that's at full crank and also has bass content, it's probably going to come out to be around -13 dB. So I think it's well chosen. I realize that you can get more peak headroom, and that iTunes is using more peak headroom. iTunes is using -16. But YouTube is also serving people, you know, not that YouTube should be serving people that drive in cars, but they're serving every possible output, and people are taking their entire music world off of by doing YouTube ripping and stuff. So YouTube is serving all people, including people who aren't even paying attention or people who are driving in cars, and -13 is probably the optimal balancing act that you're ever going to see for having a certain amount of dynamic headroom and also being able to work with a compromised listening situation. So I advise getting used to 13 dB. I think that's going to stick around. I think it parallels some natural processes, and that's what we're going to be using. And it's really a hell of a lot better than the -10 or the -8 or the -7 that some commercial pop mixes have gone to in recent years. -13 is a lot better than that. you can fit a lot into it. And when you have active peak headroom going on, stuff really does sound good. You can get stuff to sound good at that loudness target. And that's exactly what Righteous 3 is for. And that's why I've been doing so many versions of it. I'm continuing to improve this tool so that it works well for everybody and does the job. And other people can follow along and also do tools designed to target this job. Or you can simply have monitoring that's great at showing you these levels as they come across. There's some great monitoring for that as well. But Righteous is designed to rearrange the energy and put it where you want it so that it's delivering a good sound. And I'm pretty happy with how that's worked out. So I hope you enjoy Righteous 3.